Starting every 2 hours, just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And before we get into our third segment of the day, I do want to go back to Tap to Learn's comment that we just got right before the break. Hawkinson injury was so bad, I'm wary about rostering him. And I think you all should kind of be a bit wary, right? Because ACL, MCL injuries are very tough to come back from, especially, if the Vikings are talking about not rushing him back. Maybe if they are contending, you'll see him kind of come back in the middle of the season. But the reason why I'm still so high on him is that as a kind of overall threat, we get down to that fourth tier of tight ends, and we disregard injury, and we just look at this at face value. There's questions about David Njoku playing with Deshaun Watson because his kind of production dips when he does play with Watson. We'll talk about that a little bit next week. Brock Bowers is an unknown commodity. I like Dallas Goedert a little bit, but in that Philadelphia Eagles target situation, I'm not so sure. And then Pat Freiermuth, I really love him, but the Pittsburgh Steelers offense profiled as one of the most anemic in the league. And so, in this tier 4, if you disregard injury, would you say TJ Hawkinson presumptively could be the best out of that fourth tier? Maybe. I would put him, if injuries were disregarded, kind of in that 1 to 3 range in that fourth tier. So while you should be wary about rostering him, and ACL and MCL injuries are always terrible, we see it with Nick Chubb right now as he's recuperating. We see it a little bit with Jonathan Brooks, who we'll talk about next week. He still profiles as a tight end, when healthy, that can be effective in fantasy. It's a fantastic comment yet again, Tap to Learn, one of the best commenters of the day. But let's go into our third segment of today's show. QB sleepers. I love this because QBs certainly are a position right now that's not getting a lot of hype. All the hype right now is in the skill positions. Your wide receivers, your tight ends we just talked about. QBs kind of get a lot of flack because they are perhaps the most important position in real life, but in fantasy you draft them in later rounds. But they still at the end of the day are part of the chess game that you must play in terms of fantasy drafts, because you can, if you want, swing for the fences if you have a higher draft pick for guys like Mahomes and Allen we talked about yesterday. But I think that you can't underestimate waiting a little bit longer and finding a hidden gem, a diamond in the rough, maybe as your backup, maybe even as your reliable starter at the latter ends of the draft. So without further ado, let's talk about them. Let's start off with a guy who is my backup in my 12-man PPR league, Tua Tagovailoa. And I know he gets a lot of flack. Oh, he kind of is working within the system. If he didn't have Tyreek Hill, he might not be as good. But the fact of the matter is, Tua Tagovailoa truly impressed me last season. We could talk all about how he fares in the playoffs and certain weather conditions all we want. But that was the playoffs. The fantasy playoffs might be a different story. Here's an interesting fact about Tua. He was 15th overall in terms of position in 2022, 11th last year in fantasy points per game this is. In a 16-game span, from Week 8 of 2022 to Week 8 of 2023, he accumulated 300-plus points. That's a QB 3 kind of status right there. And for you to consider him in, say, the 10th to 11th round of a respective draft, that's a lot of value. And I think Tua definitely, if, McDaniel buys into this culture of not just focusing on speed, but utilizing it in different ways, then Tua will get a lot more production, not only out of his receivers as well, but make the Miami Dolphins potentially appealing, because I do worry about the Miami Dolphins as a team to call most of your fantasy players from because of how they use their speed. I've said it before, I'm worried about Devon Achane. He'll be gone by round 8. IMHO says Chef Easy sweet spot. That is kind of high for a quarterback in my mind because of the fact that in my particular draft there were so many good guys that went late that you would see as a potential starter or backup, like a Jared Goff or a CJ Stroud or even a Matthew Stafford. But if that is your sentiment, then you should go for it. You could set the standard for either a reliable, competent starter or a guy who you're comfortable as your QB2. So that's an interesting point because in the QB market, people often forget that outside of the 6th to 7th rounds, where a lot of high-end QBs tend up going early on, rounds 8 through 12 generally are going to find a lot of talent. You can even wait for your starter until then. I know that sounds a little bit hypocritical, but I feel like you could wait for your starter for, say, 9 rounds or so. And to your point, round 8 is also the realm where the QB market tends to open up a little bit more. So that is an interesting point. But let's look at another guy, first season in the league, who I have a lot of hope for. How about Jaden Daniels? I know he just lost Jahan Dotson, but he certainly has a sneaky, intriguing offense at his disposal. He has a fascinating backfield with Brian Robinson Jr. and the addition of Austin Eckler from the LA Chargers. He still has Terry McLaurin. I like Ben Sinnott a lot at the tight end position. Sneaky, I believe, 5th round pickup for them this year, and also 2nd round pick for them, Luke McCaffrey, Christian McCaffrey's brother. Very interesting wide receiver. But to go over some stats for Jaden Daniels, last year was a Heisman Trophy campaign for him at LSU, with the FBS leader in yards per pass, yards per rush, and like I said, he has all the weapons at his disposal. He opens up a lot of avenues for this Commanders offense, and while Dan Quinn profiles as a more defensive-minded head coach, I certainly feel like Jaden Daniels is one of those QBs you can go all in on, even if you are a defensive-minded coach, because of the traits he brings. And if we see his preseason, he looked very impressive and very comfortable throwing the ball vertically to a guy like Terry McLaurin. So that's another facet of the offense that could be open. So if you would like guns a-blazing young guys, pick up Jaden Daniels. And he will definitely be there, in my humble opinion, after the 8th, 9th round. And you would feel comfortable picking him up then. Speaking to in terms of rookies in rookie class, I still think Caleb is the better quote-unquote tiered player. But at the end of the day, Jalen Daniels, as Tap to Learn says, Cliff Kingsbury scares me as Commanders OC. He kind of does scare a lot of people, especially, coming out of Arizona and not necessarily, getting to a point where Arizona was seen as a contender. But if he does bring anything, he does kind of bring that West Coast style a little bit to this offense. You can't look past that. And so I think this offense, Jaden Daniels will have a lot of say in as well. It's not just going to be, Cliff Kingsbury. If Jaden Daniels proves that he can understand Kingsbury's playbook, as Tap to Learn says, maybe he's better coordinator than head coach, perhaps that is the sentiment here. Perhaps, a lot more avenues are opened up to him as a coordinator, a lot more variability in terms of how he sees his playbook and sets it up. But at the end of the day, I think that Jaden Daniels will have a large say in this. I think that if he understands and grasps the concepts that are put forth in this offense, he will shine. And he has the weapons to shine. He can rely on the screen game with a guy like Brian Robinson Jr. or Austin Eckler even. He can rely on the verticality and the intriguing options that he has outside of Terry McLaurin in Ben Sinnott and Luke McCaffrey. So I think that duality between Kingsbury and Daniels is important, to your point, Tap to Learn. But I think that the reason why a lot of people have Jaden Daniels as a sleeper is because of his own abilities, his own traits that bring out the best in him. So fantastic point there. But some other guys for your consideration. Let's talk about Will Levis a little bit, because a lot of people might be skeptical of that name. A lot of people might think, well, while he certainly has some of the more intriguing weapons in the league, he's not going to be a guy. I think that the Titans are going to be a sleeper team. They're my personal sleeper team. I think that in an AFC South that's kind of getting a little bit overconfident in terms of who you see emerging from it, the Titans might sneak up on a lot of people. I think that Will Levis certainly has a lot of moxie, certainly has the arm strength of a fascinating young QB. I think that he also brings a level of control and composure to this offense with the way he plays. And I think that's what's going to be important as we look at the Brian Callahan era of this offense. Because in the Mike Vrabel era, it definitely felt like the QBs he had, Ryan Tannehill, for example, were supplementing the run game with Derrick Henry. I think that this is not going to be the case. I think that I love Tyjae Spears. Maybe Tony Pollard can get back to his 2022 Pro Bowler form. But at the end of the day, I like the moxie that Will Levis brings to the position. And then guys outside of that, Kirk Cousins, a lot of people are hyped about him going to Atlanta and having a lot of young weapons at his disposal. But also, I think that the question about Kirk is, what is he now coming off an injury? Can he be a tempo-based quarterback, which I think is the best, like I said in the previous segment, for him? Or is he going to have trouble if it's going to be more timing-based? And then you look at guys like potentially Matthew Stafford and Bryce Young. Bryce Young, we talked about a little bit yesterday, is a very deep sleeper. I think that Bryce Young can't get any worse than last year, like I said. I think that Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette are two very interesting weapons. They don't necessarily fit the profile of a traditional wide receiver room, but they certainly are pieces that kind of are trying to solve the puzzle of the problem in Carolina. And so when I think about these overarching sleepers that people consider, a lot of these guys can be found in rounds 9 through 12 if you so wait. By all means, if you're confident in getting a superstar, go for the superstar. But I'm just saying that the QB market is more wide open than you think, and these sleepers all profile as guys who can either be a competent starter for you in some leagues, or can be nice QB2 backup options in, say, a 2 QB league, super flex leagues, PPR leagues maybe. But at the end of the day, you can't underestimate the power of the position. That should just about do it for this segment. Thank you all for commenting as well. Some fantastic comments about these guys. Keep them coming. But coming up, our next segment of today's show, we're going to switch over to the running back position because we have a lot of interesting guys there. We'll be right back after the break.